Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you all for joining us today once more and for sticking with us till this moment. Today's conversation explores a question that many engineers, product teams, and eventually even DevRel persons also encounter. Why do some technical outstanding products never become the product developers choose at the end of the day? And we've seen so many excellent products and tools being developed in a couple of years. Great documentation, impressive features and structures, and literally everything, but never gets adopted at the end of the day. And on the other side, we've seen similar products with less features and less capabilities get accepted by developers across the world. The difference is often bigger than the technology alone. And today, we're going to explore how DevRel plays a huge role in building the trust, reducing that friction, and also improving the developer experience and ultimately leading to adoption. I couldn't think of any other person who would do this other than Adewale is Abati, who's a staff developer advocate at Block and has also spent years helping developer focused products build strong relationships with their communities. Hello, Ace. Good to have you here.
Hi, Anita. Thank you for having me. I'm not sure how many people are in the audience, but hello, everyone. Excited to chat today and also just go through this topic and learn on both sides, basically.
Awesome, awesome. I'm also excited about this. And I think the perfect place to start is with the assumptions that so many companies currently have or make regarding this topic, right? There's this belief that if I build an exceptional product, developers will naturally navigate towards it and adopt it. Yet we know that that is not how things work in real time. So why do technically superior products struggle to win developers?
To be honest, that is a very complex question that looks very simple because if everyone knew why, there would probably not be any company or product that has to go through that. But like many of us, even when we have like ideas for to build a product or we're starting something, there's always that excitement about the problem. And we often even just get carried away with the technical solution to it versus the narrative, the trust, and also the UX of the, or in this case, as the case may be, the DX, which is a developer experience to give to people that might end up using that product. If you are thinking about developer focused products in this case, it's mostly about just thinking about the landscape. What is the existing workflow of these people that would likely use this product, and how much of a change does it require to get them to move away from whatever they are using at the moment to what your new product is offering, and then compare that with what is the benefit to, like, switching over. So for example, if the benefit is massive and something that you want, and the effort, the way they currently do it is insane, then there's always like that ratio is always like, you know what, one person, two people in the team have to be like, guys, we have to adopt this technological society. Like the difference is clear. But most products, especially those that are starting to just acquire customers, usually have like a curve to go through before they establish that fully developed product that just shows how much better it is compared to the current alternative. And I think that journey is usually, what's it called, misplaced when people lose sight that the people that are building it for is really the people that will end up using it
Yeah.
versus themselves and the problem that they faced, and or the shortcut, maybe not shortcut, but all the, like, you quickly fix something, you are used to the technical limitations and it works for you. But the end users don't usually care about those technical limitations. Every friction
Yeah.
is an added barrier for them, which is usually where the developer relations also come in to kind of like establish or identify some of those things that the engineers might have overlooked in the developer experience, that they could be like, oh, I can just do this instead. Where people outside would not want to just do this instead. They would want to have like a smooth flow to get to stuff. So I think that disconnect sometimes could be the biggest, issue when it comes to building a product and then getting surprised that it didn't get adopted as you hoped it was going to get.
Now, this point you made me remember something that one of our speakers pointed out, that a lot of companies focus more on the product and forget that the product is supposed to serve
Yep.
developers at the end of the day. And so like they're misguided like halfway through building, and now they're wondering where are the developers who were expecting to adopt or use this product.
It's probably a human problem because I mean you start out facing a specific problem and you build a solution to address, or even you identify the problem in the industry, for example, and then you have your understanding or belief of how the problem should be solved, and then you get into it. And the level of commitment it takes sometimes to be an entrepreneur or to build out an entire product. Sometimes you get really obsessive and you focus on just making sure this product is what you imagine it to be,
Yeah.
and then you lose sight of what the majority or some other people might prefer it to be. I think that's what happens when that is the case.
What do you think is the biggest misconception with product teams when it comes to like tool adoption?
I think it cuts across possibly two extremes. I think the first one is people believing that once the product is technically sound, or we are using the latest models, latest inference, the CPU. Now I'm talking too much AI, but in the sense of like, this is the technology stack that we are using, let me put it that way. As a result of this, it means that you're getting the best of the best, technical wise, but not necessarily fulfilling that part of how does this translate into the people that want to use this product. And the other side is also like, it's not necessarily there technically yet. There are a bunch of shortcuts or things that you've overlooked in the building process, but it's a work in progress. And you assume that if there was DevRel will fix the gaps in the product stability itself. And the reason I'm pointing out these two extremes is because everything comes back down to the middle, which is like the community trust. So, for example, if you're building a product, whether it's incredibly technically sound, whether it's a work in progress, what matters is how do the people that are using it at the moment actually feel, either for them to be able to do word of mouth recommendation, either for them to stick with the process, and they're like, okay, this is the shortcoming, but we are figuring it out together. All of those things narrows back down to that middle to then decide whether they want to go with the product that is built on the best, what's it called, technology stack, but has terrible DX, or it's something that is not yet there yet, but they have like, if you ask for feedback right now, or you recommend a change, or you're sending a pull request like, hey, we should fix this, it gives you that feedback as quickly as possible, and the changes keep coming quickly. So it depends on how that larger community of people that have already adopted the product starts to feel about the product, and then they are passionate about being advocates of your product outside of those that you pay to be developer advocates in the first place.
That's a good point. And one thing I appreciate from this perspective is that it reframes the concept of adoption as something that is often earned than guaranteed at the end of the day.
It is a lot because I mean, there's something that's happening right now. I don't know for anyone that is probably chronically online. Over the last few months, there's been some kind of like shift between those that use Cloud Code, those that use Codex, and I think it's a perfect example for this because 1 week or 1 month, everyone is upping on Cloud Code. Everyone is talking about this is the best thing. They're talking about how it makes them feel with the work that and the output. And at the same time, you have these companies that are constantly trying to come online to engage with the developers, to talk about what's happening, to give feedback. And depending on not just the output or the way the models and the NS is working for them, but also the way they are interacting with what's it called, set developers and the announcements and the way they share the new tool or the new model that is coming out. That usually also shapes the narratives of how they choose what to use or what not to use. This is probably a small sample size because I mean people do say that Twitter is a bubble, but it kind of like just scales up into like the word of mouth, people hearing what other people are talking about, people making tutorials and sharing their own opinions based on those tiny bubble or whatever the case is. And then they influence each other into like which tool should we use or which tool should you not use before you then tie yourself into one ecosystem. But because of the way that community trust and presence continues to change, like the next week or the next month, you have people switching over to Codex or switching over to a different tool because it's like, okay, maybe this is something that will, it's in a better pace, it works better for me, and that kind of thing. So it's always sometimes always like a shifting. I don't want to say shifting goalpost because the central thing is still in the middle, but the momentum is always shifting sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I am curious because based on this, it also points that people would eventually gravitate towards something that they see or find relevance in. And you mentioned creating like individuals who volunteer or willingly create content to promote these tools. So, like, at what stage should companies begin investing in developer relations, or is there such a thing as starting too early or starting too late?
That is a very good question. You need to start investing in developer relations from the beginning, but this is the comma that is in there. There's a difference between investing in developer relations and investing in a developer relations team. So if you invest in developer relations from the beginning, especially if you are building a developer focused product, you're building developer tooling, you are essentially building for your customers. Let's bring it all the way down. And you should not be building products without thinking about your customers or having some form of relationships with them right from the moment that you conceptualize your solution and you're trying to see what the right product would be. So that is the point that your developer relations start from, where you start to have those conversations. To be a focus group. There's this graph of, I think, what they call adopters, where you have like the small subsets in the beginning that are innovators, and then followed by early adopters, followed by the late adopters, and I think the general admission or whatever you call the rest of the curve. And then, of course, at the bottom, late bloomers, people that everybody is like Internet Explorer. Everybody's already using it.
They're chasing the crowd.
And then they then decide to start using it. So most of the time, you need those innovators, and those early adopters are the ones that will try out stuff. And I faced it a few times in my career as well. I think most recently when Anthropic announced MCP was, I think, November 2024. And then 2 months later, because we were working with Anthropic at the time, we were building out Goose, which is like an MCP client, one of the first at the time that was actually an AI agent that started to implement MCP, so that, showing out what those capabilities of that protocol were. And one of the biggest tasks that was like, how are you taking this technology that is essentially new? Not everyone was talking about agentic stuff. People knew about ChatGPT, knew about the models, knew about LLMs. They could text them already. But we're switching to a different side where it's like autonomous control and agents and the likes. And how do we make people understand, especially non-developers sometimes, because we're building something that could do everything. Not everything in the sense, but like could work with your documents, could write code to a certain degree. And so we had to think about the people that could use this, and then how do we get this knowledge to them? Of course, at that point in time, our first early adopters would be developers, because it was a technology that was very technical. So you needed to see how people that were technical were going to use that first. And then you started to simplify the UX, the DX, and stuff like that. So I think I've digressed a bit from the question, but back to the main question, like at what point do you start? You have to start from when you start having like that product, the solution is already being set up, you know where the part you're going to. Your teammates could be the early adopters, are starting to see how they use that. And then once you have like an MVP, you have an early set of people that start to use it, give you feedback, people that are not part of your team, people that are not committed or required to fall in line with the way you've chosen to do this stuff, so that they can give you feedback, they can tell you how this works for them, and then you continue to build on top of that before you then share it out to the public. Now, if you're starting to grow like some traction, or your team as you continue to build that product, now you people need to build more stuff, and you need someone that is directly or completely focused on engaging with the community. Then you start thinking about your first DevRel hire or your first community manager, whatever the case is. But I think progressive growth, like you do in the gym as a progressive overload, is very important. So you didn't just bloat stuff out, or just think that, you're just someone that's just writing content, and that will not exactly solve the problem. So it's just about, gradually connecting with people and then growing at the cadence, unless you guys are building insanely fast and you want to keep up that pace across all board. But yeah, so I think that my answer for that would be, you need to be able to just, what's it called? Before you find product market fit, before you have that established product that is already being sold or whatever the case is, your team itself has a direct relationship with the customers, which is the developers that you're working with. And then from that point, you can start to then scale out to get more people that are then specifically focused on that. And I think I've been part of a few teams that were able to have engineers that were building the actual product directly in the community, directly speaking with people. And what am I even talking about? Like Cloud Code, as big as it is, Codex, as big as it is, the open cloud guys were like, they're usually still on Twitter talking directly with the developers, because that part is still as important as ever. Not just the developer advocates being the ones to engage or build the relationship with the community. They're the ones responsible for tracking, for implementing, for enforcing, for implementing the feedback loop, for making sure nothing gets lost in the weeds. But the engineers and of course the founding team that wants to build a product for developers is the first set of developer relations people.
You said something.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you, but you said something that I want to draw us back to, that you could starting developer relations has to be from the onset, but having a developer relations team could come later. So can you give more context to the difference?
Yeah. So like I was trying to break down, you can't start building a product for developers if you don't have any connection with the developers. And for you to do that, You cannot also just hire a DevRel person before the product is built. That's, in my own opinion, a waste of money. Because at that moment you're just talking about concepts, you just start conceptualizing things. You could, if you have a prototype, if you want to start building up a community like early testers, or you're close to having that strategy in place, that's absolutely fine. But at the point when you start building your first point of contact are the people that are directly building that product. Like they have to be able to hear the feedback directly and also just work with the people that they are building for. The moment you start to get close to what's it called, even before product market fit, but once you start getting close to preparing for that, exploring opportunities to understand the developer community better, then you can start to hire a DevRel team so that when they do join your team, they are like a valuable addition. You do not sideline them in the engineering conversations because at the point that they are joining, they are bringing their own valuable experience as well. And you can clearly see the value add for them to help shape that product as it continues to be valuable to other developers.
Okay. You mentioned something about trust, and I think this is a word that every DevRel tends to use, but it often means different things to different persons. And so when you're thinking of developer trust, what actually does that look like to you, and how do you know when a company has earned it?
I used to say that if you're building a developer community, for example, and this doesn't necessarily have to be Discord, but we can use Discord as an example, but developer communities everywhere, especially when it comes to developer tools. But if you're building a developer community and you get to a point where non-members of your team, of your company, but like members of the community, those that actually use your product, starts to engage, talk about, or also share your product organically. Like you're not asking them to. It's not some part of ambassador program. It's just I'm using this thing and I like it so much, or it's doing so well for me. I'm talking about it, answering other people's question about it, referring people to where they could find resources about it. Then you started to develop some level of trust over the course of time amongst multiple individuals. If people feel so good about your product to the point that they are willing to like overlook some issues, they are patient enough that okay, if I report this issue, it's gonna get fixed. They know that they can share their feedback or ask for help, contact support easily, or that you are shipping quick enough and accurately enough, not just shipping more bugs. Then you are developing that trust off of the effort and the resources that you put in, and then organically you have advocates of your product that would always talk about stuff. I think they say to date the best, what's it called? The best marketing pipeline will always be word of mouth. Because no matter how many, if 100 people see your billboard or your ad, if they tell 2 people or they tell 1 person each, just exponential. And then they use your product and they tell more people and they tell more people, and it just keeps going, right? So that trust established from like if I'm using a product and I feel really good about it and it gets the job done, then I'm building trust in that product. And at the same time, if it's a work in progress, but they are able to give feedback and they're able to see their feedback implemented, and you build an ecosystem, for example, around your product, that is also another form of like trust that you're developing. Like this thing would always be here, or at least will be here for the long term. Or if there's an issue, this will be addressed. Those are the different shapes that trust could come through. But the guarantee is that if you have enough trust or enough people that trust in your product, there's the high chance that it will continue to grow because they'll continue to talk about it.
Interesting. So evidently, trust is not accidental, and I see that every interaction that the developer has with the product is likely to increase or decrease the trust, right? Now that brings to the developer experience part of things. Now, from your experience, what's the biggest source of friction with the developer journey that engineering teams tend to overlook?
I think the first part has to be like, they say first impressions matter. So even if I see a product and I'm like, oh, this might be the answer to my problem, but then I spend like 15, 20, 30 minutes and I don't find this, I don't see the answer, then there's a high chance that I'm going to close whatever it is that I'm checking out and just you've lost a customer and potential of whoever it is that they were going to refer. So like the sign up process, there's something, the quick start, but there's something they say, I think they call it first to hello world, depending on the product, like how long to hello world, which basically means that, someone finds your product and they want to see what it does. How quickly can they go from, I know nothing about this product to, this is what it can do. This is what it does. And it reminds me with the same feeling that I had when I was first learning how to code. And one of the first things I did was just do HTML background colored red. And in that, just typing that in that split moment, I just saw my entire browser, my Chrome, or maybe it was Edge. I don't know which one I was in at the time. and it just switched. Like this browser that I used to open Facebook just switched to red because I typed a text, and there's this dopamine or whatever it is that comes out of you, like, oh, this is something. And then even if you
It's like
face
a
more
magician at that point.
exactly, and even if you face slightly more like challenges along that process, you're still riding on that eye of that first win. So making sure people can get to their first win as quickly as possible is not something that I think a lot of teams prioritize, but it's something that is very valuable. You can think of some of the most random developer tools that you use today. If you are able to, like, in the first couple of minutes, don't feel entirely stupid. You get your first win because of the developer experience that is shaped up. Then there's a high chance that even if you face some more complex challenges.
I think we keep talking about developer experience a lot, and I would like to get more context how it shapes final decision that developers have regarding it too.
Yeah.
And so, like, can you break down what developer experience means in terms of product adoption?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's very much tied to what's it called? The friction part. Because if you're able to eliminate the friction, then you've improved the developer experience like drastically. I can think of, I mean, most of recent times I'm working with agentic tools. So most of the examples that come to my mind are usually like AI related agentic stuff. But I'm trying to go back to like the core stuff. So for example, if someone wants to use a library to do whatever, it could be GSAP, could be like the 2GS animation library. What is the first step to installation to the first win? That first win is something that is very critical. Like it is so important that I don't have to jump through millions of hoops to get that first win. Like even if it doesn't really get to what I want to implement exactly, like from the first time, like, oh, I'm thinking of if a library or a technology, a product that does this exact thing, even if I don't get to that exact thing in like the first 10 minutes, just an example of what is possible expands the mind and it makes you feel good about what's the next step, right? It makes you feel like you're making progress. So that first win, that setup process and the first win is a very critical part of developer relations, which is why it's going to be very rare for you to find any platform today that is targeting possibly even customers, but for that's targeting developers specifically that would not have a quick start page. It's not because they just like to do a quick start page for the sake of it, but they just all realize that it is very important. Like our documentation might be a million pages. You might be able to use our technology to do a million things, but let us keep all of that complexity aside. Are you coming here for the first time? This is the small 5 minutes, 2 minutes thing that you can do right now that shows you that yes, you know how to install the library or the
Mm-hmm.
product. Yes, you know how to initialize or start getting running. And then yes, this is what an output could look like from our product. So if you can do that within the first couple of minutes, then you've already started to create what's it called? A developer experience in a positive light for whoever is trying the product out. Then the first part now starts to get to the complexity. Okay, now I know this thing works to a certain degree. This is what I want to do. Then you need to make sure that the other resources, either is the documentation that is available for them, either is some level of tutorials, either is some video, whatever the case is, are they able to start to find additional resources that would help them find out how they can do what's it called? How they can use your product. Even better if you've been able to take enough feedback to the product itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because now we're thinking, when I say product, we're thinking both libraries, both SaaS, maybe like, or desktop applications, whatever the case is. You could take different forms targeting developers. So you're going like, even if they don't come to documentation, for example, is the product experience itself something inclined that intuitive? If you're building something that other people have built in the past, like the way everybody's building agents today, can they easily find their sessions or their scheduled tasks? Not that you hide your own in somewhere that is obscure because you want to be unique. So like it's some of those like standard processes or things that best practices as the case may be, or known practices. It might not be the best, but known practices. And if it's like a library and stuff like that, are they able to easily find out, okay, this if I want to implement this kind of complex stuff, what do I need to do? And then the next, I think the most important part after that would be, if I'm unable to, can I get help? Because now you've already sold me on a dream that your product or your library might be capable of this thing. If I'm unsure or I don't have enough time, or I'm seeing something that looks like it might help me, but I'm not entirely sure, is there
Mm-hmm.
somewhere I can get help? It could be from a human being. I don't know what the community taste is on, or should the AI also respond or not, but it could be on any kind of like source. But they feel like
Yeah.
they can get help, and then that also increases what's it called, confidence and trust in that product. Most people default to like a Discord community, especially for developers. Like if you're talking about developer relations,
Yeah.
especially for developers, if they find a developer community and then they feel like they can ask a question about that solution, that even people that are not working in the company can actually answer them. And this works great for popular products because somebody can go to Twitter today and be like, hey, I'm trying to do this thing with Cloud Code, for example. And somebody that does not even work with Cloud Code, but they've done something like that, can just come in and say, hey, this is how to do it. And that's because you've built an ecosystem around your product and also like develop some level of trust and adoption at this point. So it's important that also people within that company, what's it called, use the product so that they can feel the what other developers feel. And this, I think, I don't know if you've asked this already, but it kind of connects to how teams should genuinely see developer relations because it's easy for you to be like, oh, we need to make content, we need to be outside at conferences, or we need to talk about this thing. And then you're doing it like it's a unidirectional megaphone, like you're just shouting and
Like it's just
bombarding.
marketing.
Yes, like you're just bombarding everyone with do this, know this, blah, blah. But it needs to be some level of feedback loop. So you're telling people things, you're hearing what they're saying, you're bringing it back. The product understands what is happening. The product engineering team understands what is happening. They're working on it. They're sending that back, and it feels like an active loop that also builds confidence and trust in the people knowing that whatever they are complaining about will likely get addressed as soon as possible.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And talking about developer relations perceived as marketing, right? Where
Yeah.
should DevRel sit inside an organization to have the greatest strategic influence?
This answer has changed for me in recent times, if I'm being honest. I think it's a mix of a couple of things. I also watched I think a podcast interview recently from Kelsey Hightower and was it Greg from the Pragmatic Engineer. And
Yeah.
one thing that stood out for me based on things that he said, he's not primarily a DevRel person, but he does so much, dev work and also relationship work in the community that it kind of overlaps. But like it's about when you're joining a company, regardless of whatever your role is, you need to be focused on impact, right? So if you're someone that is like, oh, I'm a DevRel person, I'm joining this company, and they ask you, okay, so what have you accomplished? What do you do? Oh, I wrote 10 articles. Oh, I wrote 20 articles. Okay, your 20 articles, what's the point of your 20 articles? Would you have made a difference from 15 that you wrote? So he said something that I really kind of like connected with, and it was more like anytime he joins a company, thinks about what kind of impact that role is designed or is supposed to create and what impact it can create with that role. So if you are setting up a DevRel team or you're joining a DevRel team, it needs to be sat in a position where it actually makes impact on two things, in my opinion, in this case. The second one, it might be a little bit controversial, but the first one is product itself. Like you need to see close enough that it's not an afterthought. It's not like after you've built whatever shitty product you want to build, pardon my French, they are like, okay, come on, I'm going to be talking about this thing and you're facing all the backlash, and you're trying to sell a difficult product, or you're trying to sell a product that even no matter what feedback you get, you're not going to implement it because you are so far away from the cycle. That is not DevRel anymore. That's not even sales. That's outside it is. That's just being a soulless billboard. They're just out there like, hey, do you know this product? Sorry, I cannot help you. Sorry, I cannot change anything. But do you know the product? No. That's not even sales. That's the sad part. But if you're able to stay close to the product and you can give feedback, you can be like, no, don't let us build it that way. This is how people do this. This is why people do this. Or even if you don't have the answers, you can have the questions. And those questions could help the engineers or the product developers come up with better ways to, or brainstorm more on what the product is going to look like. And then the second one is revenue. So revenue, people could mistake me trying to imply sales, but not necessarily. But if you're able to think about every business wants to make money, unless it's non-profit, which they probably also want to make money in some way. But if you are doing developer relations and you want to improve the relationship of the product of the company with developers, there are different, value systems or business goals that it is tied to. So the impact definitely creates or goes directly into possibly the revenue or the adoption or just usage or whatever the case is. If you are able to tie that impact directly based on what it goes back to the business goals as, if that is indirectly or directly tied to revenue, then yeah, that works. But if it's a little bit excluded, you can figure out a way or start to think about it, which is also what I'm also trying to do myself. More like, okay, as this DevRel activity this content I'm creating, the people that are joining the product or using the product as a result of the content, the growth in the community, the impact I'm making. How does all of this actually tie back to revenue or business goals of the company? If luckily for you are able to identify a connecting path, great. If there is none for the moment, if you can think of how that could be connected, not necessarily with you doing sales, but you're still in DevRel stuff, but you're just thinking larger picture and thinking about the business perspective of things, more than just how many articles you write, but more like, yes, we have a great developer community, for example. How does that impact us as a community? And then that perspective starts to change, and even the initiatives you come up with might start to
Mhm.
change based on that perspective.
Now, when we're talking about this, especially when it comes to like revenue and business value, I see there's always confusion between sales and DevRel, right?
Yeah.
And so, how do you communicate your impact in such a way that it differentiates you from the sales team or from the marketing team, and also still shows the impact that you're making as a DevRel person team?
I think it depends on the product. You might be doing DevRel for a product that has like maybe a subscription plan, for example. And if you're talking about that, your position is not going to be like, what's it called? Hey, buy this plan, hey, buy this plan, hey, buy this plan, kind of thing. It has to come from the point of this is what you need, or this is the problem you have. This is what we are offering as a solution. Now, if you're able to convince them of what the solution is and how it benefits their life, and they want to make that purchase, you haven't necessarily gone to sell to them, but you've been
Mm-hmm.
able to solve a problem for them. It just so happens that that solution comes with a cost. Now, as someone that probably is starting to think about this from the impact or revenue point of things, you could, especially if your product is already designed around paid services or paid plans, then you can start to kind of like watch or combine metrics across the board that shows from how your resources, either the documentation, your engagement at community at events, the things that you put out there, how does engagement translate to users or paying users, and there's some level
Yeah.
of connection in that regard. And all of this without you doing actual sales of, hey, we have an enterprise plan, hey, we have a starter plan. Do you want enterprise? Definitely go for this. You already sound salesy, and you're like, no, don't choose the starter, choose the enterprise because of this and that and that. You're still focused on the user. You're
Mm-hmm.
explaining, you're going through the technical solutions to them. Then they can figure out what works best for them based on their solution. But you've cleared the first order because you're that technical person that's able to break down what their problem is to them. And then they can now decide to go with or without your services or your product.
Okay, that's actually interesting to look at. And let's take things down to on a personal level.
Yeah.
I see that you worked in a more DevRel team rather than a standalone DevRel career, which most persons tend to like have to deal with, right? And so, what are some of the lessons that you've learned that have changed your approach to DevRel from working on a team level, uh, as compared to what it would be like working as a single DevRel person on a project?
Surprisingly, for most of my DevRel career, I've actually worked as a single person. So this, in however English that is actually the first time that I'm working as part of a larger DevRel team, and
Mm-hmm.
I got to work with one of the best at the craft. Angie Jones she was my manager, and also I don't know if you know Rizal. She used to
Yeah.
be at GitHub, and then she joined us a blog. I mean, I say she joined us because she joined like a week after me, but we were basically supposed to start at the same time. And then now she's at Entire, also leading DevRel there. So like, there's definitely a lot that was different, a lot that changed also that I also learned. Like for the early part of my career, where I mean, my first DevRel team was at Ingressive. We're doing some
Mm-hmm.
level of market entry, so it was basically more about this is what these companies need. I'm gonna be the one that engages with developers to get that thing done. The companies did not really care about developer feedback. There was no complete cycle in that regard because I didn't have that access connection to the team or whatever the case is. I was kind of like, an intermediary, but we were basically preparing the developer community to maximize the product that they were bringing, which was great. I think it worked there were people that were doing that for Figma. We had GitHub, Microsoft, Google, blah, blah, blah. That was a great time. And then after that was me doing DevRel for Flutterwave, which also came with its own complications. And at that time, we didn't have a DevRel manager, but I had colleagues. I was doing DevRel with two other people, and we needed to figure out what worked best for a fintech company specifically, because this is more like the people advocating for in this case are developers, but they are also beholden to like maybe someone that's hiring them quickly. Hey, you need to implement this payment service in our platform. And then once in a while, you get to work with like account management for people to support or at least create those resources that those that are actually working in bigger companies, but need to also keep up to date with the resources of the library or the platform. So it has taken different shapes. Before I then went to Code Sandbox, where I was working directly with the CEO. So I was giving the feedback to the CEO directly, or we're collaborating on stuff. That one has
Yeah.
its own complications as well, because the CEO is dealing with so many things. You're waiting on feedback, or you're waiting on something that you need. But for the most part, and I was a solo developer there, at least before the final few months where we had someone else, and then before I left. So the thing about that is, I totally understand how crazy it is when you're the solo developer person, where you're juggling between strategy and activity in code and output and just executing on the plan that you've developed. And at the same time, trying to get other feedback cycled into the product and what they are building internally. It is insane, like without a question, without a doubt. I think if I find myself in that situation today, I would most likely ignore many of the things that you'll be expected to do. Like I'll try to ignore them and focus more on the impact of your activities. So for example, if someone is saying, I'm trying to look for not too bad example because I'm sure different scenarios will have. But if someone is saying maybe you didn't like spend too much time fleshing out documentation, like when I say document, sorry, strategy, like you're typing out all the strategy, you have all the documents fully kind of like, but you've been able to get
Matter.
yeah, like you spend so much time thinking and planning. Some people get lost in the planning that they spend quarter on planning, and then you're like, oh, I'm a developer person, I work. No, just if you have a direction and you're able to get what's it called, you have a quick idea of what that direction is and why you're getting approval, setting up the strategy document, whatever the case is, you started implementing it, and you don't get lost on the activities that the actions that you're taking, but instead on what's it called, the outputs, like the impact. So basically, you don't wait for everything to be in place before you start engaging with people, and then you're bringing the feedback, and then people can actually, like people in the company itself, can actually start to see your impact. That will fill in the gap of any other shortcomings that you had to sacrifice because you cannot. If you want to do everything, you not do everything correctly. So to kind of like cover the shortcomings of the past that you have to put aside as less important to actually get the value and impact that you were hired for in the first place. But working at Block and working under like Angie and working that team kind of like expanded the team. Like people had different strengths. You're able to break down and specialize on different things, but at the same time, you are still able to support and help across all areas. So you are a generalist that is specialized in a certain
Yes.
degree. You have that level of flexibility where you have the big picture, but you also understand how each of you could tackle a specific area so that it gets maximum attention, or what's it called? It gets the maximum impact possible. And I think one of the best parts, to be honest, working as a DevRel team is you have people you can bounce ideas off. You have people you can collaborate with within your team. Like you don't have to go to another company entirely. So you can
Yeah.
like collaborate on getting something done for DevRel. We used to do a lot of like live streams. So me, Rizal, for example, on the stream is already a computer stream. We have different levels of perspective as the case may be, same understanding, talking about technology, we're asking each other questions, we're building something out. Like that gives you a level of activity and motion that will be different from by yourself. And of course, I know so many people that have also been very successful as solo develop people, but it doesn't in any way understate rather how difficult of a challenge that it is, and how different also is if you're working in a team that kind of like supports and guides you through that process, giving you more resources as the case may be. Yeah,
I-
sometimes sorry to cut you, but in bad situations, you could have a lot of bureaucracy you need to deal with, especially in larger companies. But I
Yeah.
guess it's a trade-off here and there.
Okay. Now I'm curious, has there been a time where like great developer experience couldn't overcome the poor great DevRel couldn't overcome the poor dev experience of a product or a team that you're working with?
Yeah, I think so. I think if the problem to solve is not significant enough, there's only so much convincing you can convince people that don't want to buy your product. So, for example, and sometimes you might sell, you just don't sell enough. If that
Yeah.
makes sense, like you might get the adoption, but it's just not enough to fund a company that continues running. And sometimes that's just unfortunate. So, I think what that boils down to is the size of the product. That's why there's a product market fit phase. So if the product doesn't necessarily fit the market, but it addresses like a niche set of people that, oh, this is actually something valuable, or this is frontier tech, or sometimes the tech is just way ahead of its time. Like for example, today I'm trying to find Google Glass. I've not been able to find it anywhere. That is technology that is way ahead of its time. I don't know if there was any level of DevEx or whatever that they could have done that will make everyone adopt those Google Glasses. But if they could make the same thing today, it probably would get a different set of reception based on the other things that we've seen in wearables today. And that also applies to some software tools as well, where the product is great, the resources are there, but people just probably just prefer. The problem is solving is not big enough, for example. It's not
Yeah.
significant enough with the change that is required. And that sometimes could be out of your control. But it's also important to give that feedback. So there are times I've seen where you give that feedback to the product team, and then they start to pivot and address, could be the same concept, but address a bigger problem or expand their services or their offerings or streamline into a specific, enterprise, whatever the case is. So being able to hear that noise being able to identify noise and also clear that feedback from the community is also part of the DevRel process. And then you take that back and then you are part of the strategic conversations as well to then determine how the product moves forward. Could help save that. But I guess sometimes if the problem is not significant enough, I think, or if the product is ahead of its time, sometimes it might just be, it might just be nothing you could do. But also there are times where sometimes you figure out that angle. Like the product is great, like you say, but you as a developer person, you are able to just figure out what actual pain points or what angle, what narrative do you start to like create around this product that actually gets more people to connect to that. Oh, this is actually what this does for me. And even with that, it's still, of course, it's still a process.
That does make sense, so much sense.
Yeah.
And it brings me to something that is currently going on in the system, right? AI is like affecting every aspect of software development, even down to like how developers discover and adopt products now. And
Yeah.
so like with all of these changes, how do you think AI changes to the role of developer relations will invariably affect product adoption?
That is right in the middle of prediction slash trouble kind of question, because I think for the more serious part, a lot of us are still figuring it out. Although of course there's
Yeah.
been I think even for me today, I asked a lot of questions within the LLMs, within the agents. Like I don't have to go
Mhm.
to the documentation side, but I still do. I still go to sometimes like I still go directly to the website of the product. I still check out documentation, and more often than not, the agents themselves still go to those documentations, to those blog posts. I think what is key now is that DevRel needs to design for two customers at this point. They're designing for both the developer that is checking it out directly, and at the same time, you are making sure that an agent, if it is acting on the user's behalf, is also
Yeah.
able to access the right information. Because if you've structured the content in a way that, of course, somebody comes to the site, they're not blind, or they'll see this, they'll see that, but they are using their agent and they're like, oh, they're working on this thing and they need to figure out how to do this, for example. And then the
Mhm.
agent checks in the background, but is unable to find that information. It still affects your product. So you need, for DevRel, we need to find a way to leverage what's it called, not just discovery, but also continuous, relationships with, or should I say, structuring your platform, your educational resources, your knowledge base, to still be user friendly, but also aware of the technology that users could use or developers could use to access that information. There was a lot of things around like introducing like a LLM.txt file into your documentation. So like if the
Yeah.
agent checks it out, the basically standards and protocols that make the information in your documentation that are accessible.
Yeah.
There are MCP servers. I can't remember the name right now, just give me. But basically, if you put your documentation link into that particular platform, it generates an MCP server directly, instantly, and then it can basically consume your entire documentation within their agent. So there are a bunch of stuff like this, context 7 as well. But basically, actually, I mean, we had the same situation with Goose as well. There are going to be different standards, different things that as you're designing for humans, as you're optimizing the content structure for humans,
Mhm.
you also have to be conscious of the technology that you can implement in the background to also support agents, which is crazy because we used to move from people crawling like, oh, people just, agents rather, or robots or whatever the case is, consistently
Yeah.
hitting your site, if it's not SEO or whatever the case is. And now we are genuinely optimizing for agents that are coming to our website to or our documentation to get the knowledge that they need to help the people out. I've seen so many situations of companies of products that get so much recommendation from ChatGPT, from Claude, and then that drives up sales and adoption for them. So we are way past should I do this, should I not do this? You might not like it. You might continue to focus on making sure that documentation is optimized for developers that are consuming it directly, but it shouldn't cost you anything to create that platform, those resources that if an agent or ChatGPT or whatever the case is trying to consume your content for developers, is able to do that as well.
Okay. And I think I'm going to circle back to a question or a point you mentioned earlier, like way earlier, right? We know that when it comes to product adoption, the developer might love the product. Like the LLMs might suggest the tool to the developers. They'll use it and they find it very helpful. But then when it comes to like the final decision making on whether or not to buy into that, the leaders might not also like agree with that. And so, how do I think the question is how does the DevRel team or the DevRel persons make sure that you tick all of these boxes from the LLMs recommending down to like developers finding it useful, and then finally the higher ups also buying into the product enough to say, okay, we can go with it.
Interesting. That is a very interesting question because I think I'm trying to think of the caveats, the edge cases, for example. But off the top of my head, before I go deeper into the question, if you're able to convince whoever is implementing the platform or the product or your library into their own product, and this is the best outcome, and their executives do not trust their decision, then we need to investigate why the executives hired them in the first place. Because if someone that is working on your product is telling you this is what we want to do, and you're like, no, we're not going to do that, then you either did not trust them to handle that part of the job, or maybe there's some other alternative or something else elsewhere, right? So I think for DevRel is more like supporting the rest of the organization to understand why or why not other companies would want to adopt their platform. It could be because it's too expensive, even though it's a good product. It could be because the features that they are offering at scale, for example, maybe doesn't support enterprise adoption.
Yeah.
Banks, for example, are not so quick to adopt new technology. Larger companies that have to like deploy to either large repositories or a large employee base are also very sensitive. There's usually a cycle of reviewing tools before they actually get adopted in some large companies. So if
Yeah.
you're working in that space in the first place, I think you also need to be aware of what kind of barriers is included or is involved in, even if a developer has loved your product, what kind of barriers is involved in getting their team to actually adopt that product. And if you're able to identify this either from feedback from the developers, then you can feed this to the right teams within your company. So I think this still goes back down to that funnel where you've created that feedback loop. You've been able to, for example, in this case, you've been able to establish trust, confidence. People know that this thing can do this thing. You have that kind of connection with developers, but they want to convince their teams, or they realize that they would use your product if it wasn't so expensive, for example. Then if you're able
Yeah.
to get that feedback, then you'll be like, hey guys, people in the community like us, but we are too expensive. Can we, you know, change some things? Can we create a cheaper plan that offers something like you are basically taking the voice, which is why that feedback is important. You're basically taking the voice of developers back to the organization. And that is why it has to be a two-way thing versus just you shipping or announcing products or new features, but actually bringing back what's happening in the community to them. And I would assume most of this team also have like a marketing or sales team that would also kind of like follow up on some of those funnels to identify when their pricing is off or their security. Sometimes even like, oh, what's it called? You built this thing, but you need to add some new features to make it enterprise ready or to make it large company ready. So you also as a developer advocate to be able to identify those gaps and then you can give those feedback. And then that's how you actually make impact on the product, on the strategy, and also eventually on the revenue in some way.
I like that answer. I like
Yeah,
that
that
answer of
that
always
needed
having
me to
the
that needed me to think of the scenarios a little bit.
I like that answer, and definitely feedback loop does play a huge role in that. So, a quick instance: you are hired as a developer relations person on a team, not small scale. Now, like a fast-paced company, and you're given 90 days to make things happen, and also like get their latest tool adopted by developers. How do you navigate this?
I mean, first of all, I'm not a magician. But we clarify that. But on a more serious note, to be honest, there are many things I would say that I would do that might be different from what I would actually do, if I'm being honest. Because reality is usually different from the things that I would say will happen.
Yeah.
But I think, regardless of what situation you find yourself in, there are some core pillars that you need to prioritize. And the first one is that you are coming in as fresh eyes. Which means you are one of the best examples of customers. So if there's someone that would
Yeah.
want to adopt their product, they would come in as fresh eyes, almost like you. So one thing that you can do for yourself, especially, is you come in as a critic in a way, not in a critic for like the internal stuff, because then you can make enemies. Office politics is insane, but you come in as a critic of the product. So not necessarily telling them directly, but you come in, how can I try out this thing? Like in your first 30 days or whatever the case is, you try using the product, but instead of giving direct memory, you're just taking notes. If you have questions, you note what you're asking, you go ask them those questions and you see, okay, maybe you should have added this part in documentation, but you didn't. But you're taking note of your experience as a first user. And if somehow within your first 90 days, you fix all of those things you took note of, you've made significant impact for the product already as a new person coming in, because then you've kind of like reduced some level of friction. You've established what's it called, some cadence that you can actually give output as quickly as possible. One of the things I've seen, especially from some of my favorite developer advocates, is that within the first few weeks, maybe first week, say, if I'm being like specific or something, they would share what it looks like to use that product from a first person perspective. It could be a video, it could be content, it could be any form of content. What that video usually does is, or what that piece of content usually does is, it signals to their community that, hey, I'm doing something new. It introduces that new product to their community, which is definitely automatically new eyes. And excuse me, for anyone that is already aware of that product, for example, being able to see what it looks like for a new person to try it out could also convince them to try it out. So basically, doing that first thing is creating some level of momentum, resource, and also like impact in some way. Like the first week, you've already created something, you've pushed out something. Okay, maybe this person has eye agency, maybe this person knows what they are doing. It's also like a first impression thing. But you cannot do that and then die down the next week. You have to keep momentum going. And one way is just to track what are the things that you have questions about, what are the things that you're wanting out to do, what are the things that is hard for you to figure out how to do, and then what kind of questions or issues exist. I don't think you should get too carried away with like things that don't yield product instantly. You definitely need to think about strategy, like, oh, where does this thing fit in? But those are things that you can do when you're just thinking passively. I don't think you should spend days or weeks trying to, what's it called, get all the strategy right, share it with the manager. Hi, what do you think about this document? And then you go and wait for like 1 more 12, 3 hours, and then they come back and tell you what the document looks like, and then it's even something I have done in the past, if I'm being honest, because you learn from our mistakes, but it's not something that you should do, because time would go and I realize that 3 weeks in, you probably have only made so little impact. Or maybe you wrote an article, but half of people saw it or something like that. So I think just perspectively thinking about, what is the impact of this action? What is the impact I want to get out this week? I like to call it in general as well as value-driven development. So what I'm doing, what is the value of it? Who is benefiting? What is the outcome I'm expecting from this? If I'm writing an article, am I just writing an article for the sake of check, article done? Or like, if somebody reads this is what they are now able to do. This is the value I want them to take away from this content piece. This is what I want them to try. This is what the benefit could be for my company, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes you also just need to build out a knowledge base. So that way you also know that, okay, we just need to have 30 articles, for example, in quote. This is a different scenario, for example. You need to have 30 articles in quotes covering these specific areas. So you're not just writing those articles for the sake of writing those articles. You're writing those articles because you're addressing a missing gap. So that if you find yourself in a situation where you need to point somebody to address that gap, you've spent time to create the resources that they will fall back to. So you're not just creating content for the sake of content, but like everything has a grander purpose, right? So being able to think in that direction, you figure out what are the quick wins, things that you struggle with as an early adopter or as a first person, fresh eyes, and then that basically friction fixes. If you're able to do that early, that'll be like, oh, this person is making impact. And then you start to look into things about what is something that if we actually fix this in the next month will be incredibly significant. So you start to pick up something that is larger. You bring like you create a they don't have a quick start, which is rare, but if you're joining as the first DevRel, possibly you probably don't have one. You're able to create something like that just changes the entire how long to first win process, and it's like a W for whoever is checking out that platform. And then you start to establish a feedback loop. Who are you working with in product? Who are you working with in engineering? Who are people that you can speak with? If there's feedback in the community, what platforms do you have already? Are you there? Who can you get those feedback to make sure that it's implemented? These are things that I start learning about that system. But if you're able to do all of this in the first 30, 60 days, then you can start to now scale like into more impactful stuff. Like, okay, now I'm familiar. I know what's happening here. I know what's missing. We are doing stuff in the community. But you basically hit the ground running as a developer advocate, and you can already see the impact that you've had in that company at that time.
Okay. Well, that's good feedback. I would have that in mind. I hope you're also taking notes. Those that are going to watching this, take notes because this is good advice right here.
Be myself because I'm currently job hunting. I'm in the middle of jobs. So if I start a new one, I probably remember, don't spend too much time on strategy Ace. Go and cook. Well, yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Okay, Ace, I'd like us to end with one final question, right? Imagine you're having this conversation in a couple of years, right? What do you think would separate companies that consistently win developers from the ones that struggle to even struggle to win developers, even when they're building like excellent products?
That seems like a very simple question, but I need to think about my answer in a way that I'm not missing something. But what the first thing that popped in my mind is like the product itself would not matter less, but there will be less. How will I put this? It will be easy to make products. So technically, from what we are seeing, people are shipping stuff, whatever the case is. There's a lot of slop, obviously.
By the second.
There'll be processes that will fix all of that. So building a reliable product, building a connection and trust would probably go further than anything else in the next few years, as the case may be. And then being able to, especially for developer tooling specifically, we don't know what developer tooling is going to look like. If everything's going to be centered around AI-powered stuff, only God knows. But as we continue to build, because there are people that are fighting back, people don't want AI to take over everything, which is valid. There's a lot of caveat, there's a lot of discernment that needs to go into this AI conversation. But depending on what it looks like in the next 5 years, there will be a lot of connection back to how does this help you get stuff done? How does this create value for the individual person? And do people trust this service? So if you're still in DevRel, if DevRel still exists at that point, being people that oversee that relationship would always still be a thing. Why are you using my product over another person's product if the product is the same? It's probably because you have confidence in the people that are working on this. You have established a relationship with their ecosystem, which is also, I don't think I mentioned that in one of my answers. One of the greatest acts, if you're building a product that's targeting developers, is to create an ecosystem around it where the developers themselves can start to build stuff on top of your product. And that just makes them committed to that entire thing. So everything was going to boil back down to that trust, that relationship and connection they feel with your product, because it gives them some sense of, okay, this is a reliable team, this is a reliable product. If I have an issue, I can probably get it fixed, or I can contribute the fix myself as a developer. So those are things that I think will factor in. I don't know if that answers your question. I probably rambled a bit there. But yeah, I don't think anyone knows exactly what the state of this space will look like in 5 years. That's a long time. That's a very long time.
Yeah, so true. Like things are moving on so fast. It's hard to keep up.
It is insane.
Well, that answered most of my questions, and I think we've come to the end of this session today. Ace, this has been really insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and insights with us today. I hope you find this really, really useful. If you enjoyed this session as well as others before now, be sure to follow up on like DevRel Compass for upcoming webinars. This is like the last of this particular series for now, but we have more resources to share and more conversations around developer relations and developer experience as a whole that will be coming up. So thank you everyone for following up with us till this point, and see you on the next series. Have a wonderful day, everyone.